In the brutal underworld of 1930s Harlem, where orders were absolute and failures were fatal, Dutch Schultz, one of America's most feared gangsters, issued a direct command, a simple hit, a show of force. He sent not one, not two, but 12 of his toughest, most trusted men to execute a rival. The target? The up-and-coming, impeccably dressed Bumpy Johnson. The outcome defied all logic, all understanding of power in the streets. 12 men went in. Only one crawled back out, broken and bleeding. Why? Why did only one man return from a mission that should have been a straightforward massacre? The answer lies not in the bullets fired, but in the single, terrifying message that sole survivor delivered. To understand the sheer audacity of this failure, you must first understand the man who ordered it. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer, wasn't just a gangster. He was a force of nature. He controlled the beer and numbers rackets in the Bronx with a paranoid, volatile fury. His temper was legendary, his power seemingly unchecked. And on the other side, standing in his way, was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was Schultz's opposite in style, but equal in cunning. Where Schultz was a brawler, Bumpy was a strategist, a sharp, intellectual figure who commanded respect in Harlem not just through fear, but through loyalty and a cold, calculated intelligence. He was a local king, and Schultz, the invading tycoon, saw him as an obstacle to total control. This was more than a territorial dispute. It was a clash of ideologies, of eras, and it was a battle Schultz was determined to win with overwhelming force. He assembled a hit squad designed not for subtlety, but for annihilation. 12 hardened men, armed to the teeth, were briefed on a single objective: eliminate Bumpy Johnson at his known haunts and send a message to all of Harlem about the cost of defiance. It was meant to be a surgical strike of terror. But what Schultz hadn't accounted for was Bumpy's most powerful weapon, his network. Harlem was Bumpy's fortress, and the people, the shoeshine boys, the bartenders, the street vendors, were his eyes and ears. The moment Schultz's convoy of killers crossed into Manhattan, whispers traveled faster than their cars. Bumpy was warned. He wasn't just warned, he was prepared. He turned the tables completely. Instead of finding a single target, Schultz's men walked into a masterfully laid ambush. The location, perhaps a bar or a street corner Bumpy frequented, wasn't a hunting ground for them. It became a trap. Gunfire erupted not from their weapons first, but from rooftops, doorways, and passing cars. It was a whirlwind of violence orchestrated by Bumpy. The numbers meant nothing because the element of surprise, Schultz's greatest advantage, had been inverted. The conflict was short, brutal, and shockingly one-sided. 11 of Schultz's men fell to the coordinated counterassault. Their bodies left as grim testament to a catastrophic miscalculation. The 12th man, whether by sheer luck, deliberate design, or because he dropped his weapon and fled, managed to escape the kill zone. But his mission wasn't over. Beaten, shot, and trembling with shock, he was given a purpose. Bumpy Johnson, standing amidst the carnage, had a final move to make. He needed a messenger. He approached the sole survivor, looked him in the eye, and delivered a statement. Clear, concise, and dripping with chilling authority. It wasn't a long speech. It was something like, "You tell Dutch Schultz that Harlem is mine. You tell him the next man he sends, I'm sending back to him in a box. You tell him to stay out." The man, clutching his wounds, absorbed every word, knowing it was his only ticket to staying alive. He stumbled back to the Bronx, to the lion's den he called home, to deliver not a report of success, but a message of humiliating defeat and a direct threat from a man Schultz had just profoundly underestimated. The consequences were immediate and seismic. For Dutch Schultz, this was an unimaginable loss of face, resources, and fear. He lost 11 soldiers, and the one who returned was a living symbol of his failure, parroting the words of his enemy. His aura of invincibility cracked. While still powerful, he now had proof that his reach had limits, that there were places where his brand of chaos wouldn't work. For Bumpy Johnson, this was a defining moment that cemented his legend. He wasn't just a local tough anymore. He was a man who had stared down the mighty Dutch Schultz and made him blink. His reputation soared in Harlem. Loyalty to him solidified into something unbreakable. He proved that intelligence, community, and strategic planning could defeat brute force. The power dynamic in New York's underworld shifted. A border was drawn, and it was respected. The legacy of that night is a lesson in the true nature of power. Dutch Schultz believed power was about fear, numbers, and loud demonstrations of force. Bumpy Johnson understood that real power is about control. Control of information, control of territory through respect as much as fear and the strategic application of violence. Schultz's story would end in a chaotic, bloody demise in a Newark restaurant, his empire crumbling. Bumpy's would evolve. He became the enduring godfather of Harlem, a folk hero. The single survivor in his message taught the criminal world a hard truth. You can send an army to take a kingdom, but if the king knows you're coming and his people are loyal, that army is just walking into a grave. The message was a weapon, and on that night, it was the only one Bumpy Johnson needed. The message that lone, shattered survivor delivered to Dutch Schultz was more than a warning. It was a psychological atom bomb dropped directly into the heart of Schultz's fragile ego. Imagine the scene in Schultz's fortress-like office, the air thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of illicit business. The door creaks open, and in stumbles not a conquering soldier, but a ghost, pale, bandaged, eyes wide with trauma that no street tough could fake. He doesn't just report failure. He reenacts it. His trembling voice repeats, verbatim, Bumpy's icy decree. Harlem is mine. The next man you send comes back in a box. Stay out. In that moment, Schultz wasn't just hearing the words of Bumpy Johnson. He was, for the first time, truly seeing him. This wasn't a rival gangster issuing a threat. This was a sovereign king dictating the terms of a truce from a position of absolute strength. The messenger's physical state was the undeniable proof. Schultz, a man whose power was built on the currency of fear, was now being paid back in that same coin, and the transaction left him bankrupt in his own headquarters. His legendary temper, which usually erupted in violent outbursts, might have gone cold, a far more dangerous sign. The rage was still there, but now tempered by a chilling, unfamiliar calculation, the calculation of risk versus annihilation. To immediately retaliate would be to walk blindly into another, potentially deadlier, trap. Bumpy had just demonstrated a tactical genius and intelligence network that Schultz could not match. The map of New York in Schultz's mind was forcibly redrawn. Harlem was no longer a prize to be plundered, but a sovereign nation with a standing army and a brilliant general. This single event created a stalemate born not of mutual respect, but of mutual, crystal-clear understanding. Schultz learned the limits of his reign. His subsequent operations grew more paranoid, more insular, focusing on defending his existing Bronx and beer empire. The wild ambition to consume all of New York's rackets was, in that moment, cauterized. The legend of that night did not stay confined to shadowy backrooms. It became street gospel. In the barbershops, pool halls, and tenement stairwells of Harlem, the story was told and retold, each time embellished perhaps, but with a core of unshakable truth. Bumpy wasn't just a protector. He was David who had felled Goliath's entire platoon. His name became synonymous with inviolability. This granted him unprecedented leverage. He could now negotiate with other mob powers, not as a subordinate neighborhood boss, but as a peer. Figures like Lucky Luciano and the emerging commission had to account for him. He became the exclusive broker for any criminal enterprise wishing to operate in Harlem, a taxing authority that even the syndicate recognized. The sole survivor, whose name is lost to history, became the most effective propaganda tool Bumpy never had to pay for. The survivor's existence was the ongoing proof. Every time he was seen on the street, limping or glancing over his shoulder, he was a walking monument to Schultz's failure and Bumpy's supremacy. He was a living, breathing lesson every aspiring gangster and enforcer. Loyalty to Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a job. It was the safest bet in a dangerous world. The intelligence network that had enabled the ambush grew stronger, funded by increased revenue and unwavering community trust. Harlem became an intelligence black hole for outsiders, a place where strangers were noticed, where plans couldn't be kept secret, where Bumpy's ear was to every ground. Schultz, in contrast, spiraled. The humiliation festered, feeding his already profound paranoia. His inability to retaliate effectively against Bumpy may have pushed him to take even bigger, more reckless risks elsewhere, like his infamous and failed plot to assassinate prosecutor Thomas Dewey, a move that would ultimately lead his own nervous syndicate partners to order his execution. They didn't kill him for failing against Bumpy, but the instability that failure revealed made him a liability. The chaotic, bloody mess of his death in a Newark restaurant, babbling incoherently about unknown assailants, stands in stark, poetic contrast to the controlled, precise, and strategic victory Bumpy engineered on that Harlem street corner. The legacy, therefore, is a masterclass in the architecture of power. Schultz's model was extractive and terror-based. He took what he could, scared whom he must, and believed scale alone guaranteed victory. It was a crude, linear form of power. Bumpy's model was infrastructural and network-based. He built a system, an economy, the numbers racket, a social contract, protection for the community, an intelligence apparatus, the eyes and ears of Harlem, and a mythos, the legend of invincibility. His power was circular, self-reinforcing, and rooted in the very soil of the territory. The 12-to-1 ratio is the ultimate metaphor. Schultz invested quantity. Bumpy invested in quality. Quality of information, quality of positioning, quality of local governance. In any conflict between a brute force algorithm and a sophisticated, adaptive system, the system will almost always win. The final, unspoken part of the message the survivor carried was this: you rule through fear of the people. I rule through the people's fear for me. That is the chasm that separated them. That is why only one man came back. And that is why, long after Dutch Schultz was buried in an unmarked grave, Bumpy Johnson's name is still whispered with a reverence that transcends crime, becoming a permanent part of the story of Harlem itself, a symbol of defiant, strategic, and utterly resilient black power in an era that sought to crush it.